Hi, Joe.
Thank you. Hello, Joe. Easy to remember your name, Joe.
Yeah.
So please,
Yeah.
tell us, share with us, how old were you when you first began learning about watches from an actual watchmaker?
Yeah. Actually, I was in my school and summer break, and I was 16 years old.
And who did you learn from?
I learned it from a distant relative from back home in Athens, Greece, who was working at home at the time doing part-time work after his daytime job. So I was interested to learn about the trade, so I offered if it was okay for me to go and watch him and learn how things are done. And every day was more every day passed by and I was getting more interested. So after not too long I decided to quit going to school and learn the trade.
Okay, thank you. And what were some of the first luxury watches that you worked on?
Well, that was a good 6 months after I was learning or watching how things are done at my friend's apartment house. It was about 6 months later, or maybe 7, that I worked at the shop where this gentleman was working during the day. And the shop was an independent representative of the 2 highest 10 brands, which was Vacheron Constantin and Jaeger-LeCoultre. That was when I started working during the day, but I wasn't working on those watches at the time because you need to have some more training before you work on something as high end or luxury or detailed perfect machinery like that.
I understand.
Yeah.
I understand. And in what year? So this was all in Greece. When did you come to Canada?
I came to Canada December 1967.
And how long were you in Canada when you received your first opportunity to work with luxury watches here?
Yeah, I was in Canada about 6-7 months before I finally found a watch repair shop. They would accept me to work as an apprentice because I wasn't a qualified watchmaker when I came to Canada. I was only 6-7 months maybe a year that I was in the trade. So the company that hired me to work as an apprentice with the condition that I would go to school during the evenings 2 or 3 times a day. This was provided by the government of Ontario, and the college was George Brown College. They were providing these courses. And at the time, once you completed a certain amount of so many hours or so many years of apprenticeship and school education, you would be qualified to pass an exam to get a license so that you can work on your own or be qualified as a fully trained watchmaker.
And what was the training that you got at that time? With what kind of watches?
At the time, it was Rolex watch company that I worked for, and I was working mainly on Rolex and Tudor watches. Tudor is an affiliated company of Rolex, as we all know. So I was practicing and learning.
And after those 2 years, did you have a formal examination to do?
Actually, yes, it was maybe two or 3 years later that I could apply so that I can pass an exam to qualify for the license, which was mandatory at the time to practice as self-employment. You could work under somebody's supervision, but you could not have a shop at the time working on customers' watches if you didn't have a license. Therefore, I applied for the license, for the exam to go for the license, and I passed. So I received the license, but I was still working for Rolex watch company.
Okay, and if there is a watchmaker today that chooses to obtain Rolex training, can they do it the way that you did it when you
Yes.
were starting your career?
Yes.
Can they just contact Rolex and say,
Yes, they can. They have to go the same way as I did, apply and express yourself that you are not fully trained. You're willing to learn if they're willing to train you. At my time, I was fortunate that they accepted training me. So they can still do it now. I don't know if they would. I cannot answer that. There could be other manufacturers. I'm sure this is done in Switzerland. I'm sure it's done. A lot of manufacturers would train people to become watchmakers. So eventually they were workforce ready for themselves.
that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And after your initiation with Rolex, which sounds like a wonderful initiation into the business, what were the next watches that you recall working on?
Well, after working for approximately 5 or so years at Rolex, I wanted to experiment learning about other brands and our other watches. So I left Rolex, and I had heard that Boulevard Watch Company was hiring watchmakers. So I applied, and they accepted me. But at the time, it wasn't for me to work on Boulevard. It was for a brand name called Universal Genève, which Boulevard was representing in Canada as far as distributing it and service. So they asked me to work for Universal Genève, which for me was great. I didn't have any objection, so we started working. And meantime, Boulevard, not too long ago, had invented this watch, which is a pioneering mechanism which ran on a battery called Acitron. The principle of repairing the watch was quite different than repairing a regular mechanical, manual, or automatic watch. And let's not forget, this watch runs on a battery. Therefore, I managed to, since I was in the premises, learn how to repair this brand called Acitron, which happens to be one of my favorite watches. And so I became quite an expert on that, as well as everything else I knew before that. And at the time, I was still anxious to know about more brands and more watches. So the best way to do that was to go on your own, to be self-employed, which way you would have a chance to get many more different brands to repair.
1992 was a big year in your professional career.
Yes.
Where, if you can please share with us, where were you working at the time, and what professional training opportunity came your way during that time in your career?
Okay. Before 1992, I must say that I had left. I left employment with Bulova, and I had decided to be my own boss, to be self-employed, that is. And that started in 1974. And because of my credentials, I was able, and my skills, I guess, I was able to get a lot of high-end watch repairs from various jewelry stores or importers of watches, etc. Such as I was working for few high-end jewelry stores. One of them would be Rosenthal's, which do not exist now. And that went on for a good decade or so. My business had grown quite a bit. I had acquired 3 or 4 full-time watchmakers and 2 or 3 part-time watchmakers. So life was going on fairly normal, and things were changing, of course. The quartz watches came in the picture. Repairs on mechanical watches were not so much anymore. Volumes on watch repairs were coming down, and also the employees I used to have, some decided to quit, retire, etc. Then comes along the owner of this Rosenthal jewelry store became associated with Tiffany, who at the time, 1992, Tiffany ventured to open their own store in Toronto, Canada. That was the first flagship store on Bloor Street. So I was approached by the manager of Tiffany if I would be interested in representing Patek Philippe brand to do the service, because Tiffany was going to be carrying the watch in their store to sell. And obviously, any watchmaker would not refuse an offer like that. So then we made the arrangements with Patek and Tiffany, and I traveled to Geneva to Patek Philippe, and I took a 6-week course for me to learn more details about that brand particularly, and the way things are done in high-end watch repairs. And that was it. And that relationship was going fairly good. It was very fruitful for me, because it meant that if you can repair that such high-end watches, you were pretty good. And well, I don't want to brag about it, but I consider myself a fairly good watchmaker.
Thank you.
So,
that sounds like it, Joe. And what an
but
opportunity.
that was a good credential, I must say.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And do you? I'm certain over the course of your career, over all those many years, you've come across some challenging repairs.
Oh yes, I did. As a watchmaker, it's hard to say when you've seen it all. You start, and then decades later you find out, oh, I never seen this timepiece.
So there's always something new.
There's always something new that comes along, and also the problems. This business is troubleshooting. You're constantly trying to figure out what's gone wrong, so the watch doesn't work properly, or doesn't keep time, or stops.
So your next big challenge is still around the corner.
Yeah.
And even after that,
I'm in it now. That makes it 45 plus almost 50 years, you know. No, so it is 50 years as a watchmaker. And there is still the odd time that I see something that I haven't seen before.
Excellent.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that this is a fascinating and very interesting trade. You can develop a passion very easily for it, you know. So the trade has been good for me. I raised a family, made a decent living. I have never been unemployed. I worked all my life since 16. So I have no complaints. I have no complaints. I don't think I'm going to fully retire. And it's not only me. I know people in the trade, they're in their late 80s.
Wow.
They're still fooling around with watches on the bench, and they're having fun. They're enjoying it.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So,
excellent.
If the Lord up there let me work, I will work. So.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Joe.
Thank you, Joe.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah.